to accountants slash bookkeepers of big company. What is the craziest things employees tried to expense? I was once emailed the company's new expense protocol in the middle of meal and discovered that there was now a $50 limit for any solo meals eaten on business trips. I'd already accrued $60 in charges that night. They stuck me in a fancy ass hotel with an overpriced restaurant, so my solution was to order another filet mignon plus 2 desserts and claim I ate with the client. That gave me a $200 limit, which I comfortably stayed under. My dad does budget stuff for the Navy. They had a sailor that had a job requiring him to have a Navy credit card. He then used said credit card to buy a plane ticket down to Peru and got arrested in an airport trying to smuggle back a large amount of cocaine. The shitty part is now they have to wait for him to get out of Peruvian prison to process him out of the Navy / prosecute him here. Here is a short list of reimbursements I've had to deal with. Shipping white tiger, personal, across the country. Trampoline, $1,800 per month vehicle lease. $26,000 per month rent reimbursement. International airfare for spouse in another country. Did not have a spouse before they left, nor mentioned the possibility of acquiring one. 70 inches 4K TV. 500 bottle wine collection. Executives are fun. Something of a reversal of the other stories, but a scientist at a lab I used to work at was working on an experiment and realized that he needed a signal amplifier. It didn't need to be super accurate, but it did need to magnify the hell out of the input if he was going to measure anything. It was just before Christmas and half the staff were already on vacation, including most of the procurement department. Plus, even if procurement was in, it'd take 2 weeks for the parts to arrive, and he needed to perform the measurement now. Thinking quickly, he got a hold of the lab credit card, drove down to the local Radio Shack, and bought their most expensive amplifier. Brought the amp back to the lab, hooked it up, and proceeded with the experiment. Come January, he has the awkward position of trying to convince accounting that buying a $500 stereo on Christmas Eve was a legitimate business expense. Not an accountant, but I used to approve expense reports as a sales manager. 3 incidents come to mind. Took one of my young salespeople out to a monthly one-on-one lunch, grabbed the check, and said I'd pay it because I could expense it. This was built into my operating budget and perfectly fine with ownership. A few weeks later she submitted her monthly expense report, and every lunch she had bought since that day was on there. She thought expensing all lunches was okay, based on me expensing the lunch we had together. She was new to the job and didn't know any better, so I explained it to her and had her submit her report. Different job, group meeting in SF. A bunch of guys, I wasn't there, go out to dinner, drinks and a strip club. One of the dudes hands his expense report in, and it includes a $100 lap dance. His boss was a friend of mine and told me he had paid for it with his corporate Amex. National sales meeting at the Rio in Vegas. A bunch of our colleagues from the UK were there and walked in one morning straight from a night of partying, still drunk. The company had a very liberal expense policy for entertainment, but rejected the $5K plus expense report for bottle service one of the guys submitted. Yes, they had spent $5,000 in one night on bottle service at one of the casino clubs. A guy used to work at my company who played our expense policy like a goddamn fiddle. He would always volunteer to drive, everywhere, all the time. People thought he was just being nice or maybe was a bit of a control freak, but the real reason he volunteered was so that he could expense every single mile driven. We are talking half-mile drive to lunch, when people were happy to walk. He would submit an expense report for the mile round trip drive. Rumor had it that he kept a second family in Europe, and he regularly scheduled trips there to spend time with them, all on the company dime. As far as I know, there was never any proof, so he wasn't fired for it. He cheated on his wife several times and his mistress sent him lewd faxes to the shared office line. This was before email. The secretary would deliver the received faxes to him, and then, per office rules, she would make sure to keep a copy of each fax received in the big binder of received faxes, because fuck that guy. I know this doesn't have to do with abusing expense reports, but seriously fuck that guy. He would regularly weasel into other groups for lunch and dinner during big company conferences when everyone would be expensing all meals, because the company rules state that the check be paid by the highest ranking individual, and then they list all employees who were on the check. This guy would hear a group of friends from a department he didn't work in planning to head to lunch, and then force them to invite him along so that he could sneak onto their check and have his lunch expense allocated to their department rather than his. Even after he was fired, he continued to patronize the subsidized employee cafeteria, where he had a deal with the chef that he could take home all the leftover soup at the end of the day. He claimed he was taking it to drop off at a homeless shelter, but he was actually taking it home and eating it. He did not pay for it. Fuck you, Ron. You're the worst. I'm going to claim the title of the most NSFW thing that had the most scrutiny and yet went through as legit. One of my coworkers had to expense 4 blow-up dolls once on a state purchasing card. State cards are tax-free and heavily audited for that reason. Best part, it was for a totally valid reason. We were testing the dispersion of shrapnel from an explosive round. Our body simulacrums hadn't arrived and well, long story short, a tax-free state purchasing card was used to purchase 4 blow-up dolls from a nearby sex shop that were then used on a munitions test range. If dolly deflated, round was effective. Multiple uses possible with the judicious application of tape. When questioned, we pointed out the cost of the range was about $10K a day. The cost of the personnel on site was about the same if not more, and that we basically saved the state $20K plus per day we would have been waiting for the body simulacrums. We weren't worried about damage assessment, but simply shrapnel dispersion. So we didn't need realistic bodies, just human shapes that you can easily tell if they took a hit or not. I do auditing, so we sometimes have to go through the per diem and require receipts for unusual items. A construction company had charged my client $1,500 for a one-day trip out to a site. When we asked for receipts, the guy who went on the trip kept sending us receipts with dates and locations that didn't match. When he finally sent us the real one, there was a $1,000 charge for body work. The employee was from America and was in South America doing the site visit. He'd listed it on his reimbursement form as a local translator. TL. Doctor, guy tries to get reimbursed for some high price call girls by saying that they were translators. I heard this story from my dad. A guy was on a business trip and used his company card to go to a bar and get really drunk. He ended up at a strip club by the end of the night and spent something like $15,000. He woke up the next morning in full panic mode and decided he would call the company theft department and say someone stole his card, seemingly forgetting that he had to call the company credit card department to ask them to raise his credit limit the night before. Definitely got caught in that lie and caused the entire company to change its reimbursement policy. A mid-level non-manager put a family vacation with 5 or 6 kids in the $7,000 range on a company credit card. This was 10 plus years ago, so I unfortunately don't exactly remember how she tried to justify it as a business expense. The most ridiculous part of the story is she was simply put on probation and asked to pay it back. Not an accountant, but when I was in college, the student government had a retreat. They submitted a receipt from the liquor store for reimbursement. Not only was it prohibited to buy alcohol with school money, it was against school policy to allow drinking during school functions. I'm not even sure all the members were of legal drinking age. It did not go over well. I'm not an accountant in any way, but used to work for a large office. We had a board member expense a $500 box of cigars once, and he was allowed to do it on the condition that he never expensed cigars again. On a more ridiculous note, he'd get a check every week reimbursing little costs like parking and business lunches, under $100, delivered to him by a personal driver. Then expense the cost of hiring that driver in the 100 kilometers it took to pick up the check in person. A friend and I went out to dinner, and he expensed his portion. He explained the company allowed him to expense $57 for dinner. Anything over $57 was automatically flagged and rejected. That kind of made sense, until he also explained anything under $57 was also flagged and rejected. So he couldn't order like a $40 dinner and expense it. He had to order more food he didn't want, and have the waiter do some weird check splitting to make his bill exactly $57. not an accountant, but have had to submit expenses in the past. I was sent to Rome to try and work a contract with a large Italian telecoms company while the hotel overlooked their office. It was actually a several mile round trip due to the road layout. So I had to get taxis. Taxi receipts are sponsored by local businesses. One particular taxi receipt was sponsored by a strip club. It was interesting submitting a receipt with a black and white advert with a strip club name and picture of a semi-naked lady on. Some asshole using a research fund between 5+ universities would fly from California to Illinois once a week and put the plane tickets on the grant money. By the time the research team noticed, it was far too late. That grad student's advisor refused to renew the student's visa over the incident. He was a German student and refused to let the student finish his PhD. The university forced him to finish it remotely, and now that grad student is a scientist in Australia. A friend of mine used to work in purchasing for a large refinancing company. He told me they saw ridiculous spending all throughout the company. But the worst one he saw was when all of the team leaders went to a conference called Family Reunion. They thought it would be hilarious if in the next exercise they all had to sit on toilets. So they ordered close to 100 toilets for each team leader to sit on for one meeting. The toilets then sat around until given to random employees throughout the company. TL. Doctor, unnamed companies buys 100 toilets for people to sit on for one meeting. A gentleman I used to work with traveled about 300 miles round trip in a company vehicle, purchased fuel on the company credit card, and purchased a $400 puppy on his company credit card. He was a facility maintenance manager, so the dog didn't really fit within his job responsibilities. He was let go shortly after. When I was a new staff auditor, a senior staff, and I got sent out of town to perform an inventory observation. He was known as the creepy guy in the office for being smarmy in general, and especially with the ladies, unprofessional on a few levels. Before we leave, he tells me, "Hey, this is going to be a great trip, there's an excellent steakhouse there." I'm thinking, alright. This is going to be great. We get there, and it's a $35+/PLATE kind of restaurant, and I start thinking this is kind of expensive for our inventory observation. He orders the $45 steak, I get the $35 fish. He gets wine, I don't. He gets dessert, I get a cheaper one. He paid for dinner, but I paid for my hotel and breakfast the next morning. The count goes fine, and we cruise back home. I submit my expense report, and a few days later the admin that approves me sternly calls me over. "Did you go on that out of town observation?" "Yes." "What the heck were you thinking spending that much on dinner?" The senior staff chose where we ate." She huffed and sent me along. A couple weeks later, a firm-wide policy set a ceiling for out-of-town dinners somewhere around $25 before tip, and no alcohol. As for things I've seen, I found a guy who put a tank of gas on his expense report. Not a huge deal, except he was across the country on a business when the charge occurred locally, i.e. gone from the 1st to the 15th. Bought tank of gas on the 7th. He was getting the company to buy his wife's gas. An employee from my company went on a work trip for a week and took his family. Not unheard of, but the company won't cover their food costs. Not sure how this guy thought he was going to slip beer/cigarettes and a 2-day Disney World passes on the expense without anyone noticing. He was promptly told to fuck off. CPA here. We have had clients expense everything including personal vacations, clothing, childcare and vet bills. Nothing surprises me, I just reclass it to distributions and move on. Small business owners. But the best was one of our own staff. We had a senior auditor take a junior staff on a out-of-town audit. The senior is paying for everything, meals, hotels etc. The junior is feeling guilty and asks what he can pay for, so the senior tells him he can pay for gas. Gas is not reimbursable, only mileage. This was at a small company, but the CEO expensed his entire country club wedding, said it was an investor meeting that just happened to coincide with his wedding date. Another time, he tried to expense a family vacation with spa treatments for his daughters. When the CFO told him he wasn't allowed to do that, he acted as though he didn't mean to submit those receipts to us, and he just meant to pay that portion of his Amex hour of his personal account. I work for a certain government agency and my job involves examining the returns of individuals and small business owners. My favorite is the 2-week business trips for a guy and his entire family. Or the dude who bought a S-Class Mercedes and claimed it was for deliveries. He sold seafood wholesale. Some other notable, though less expensive frivolous deductions include daily coffee from Starbucks, songs purchases from iTunes, really anything claimed to be a business meal that totaled less than $10, random stuff from Amazon they bought throughout the year, movies, electronics, video games, candy etc. Gas purchase to go to their office, commuting charges aren't deductible when no vehicle was used in their business, and so on. It should be mentioned that under the correct circumstances many, if not all, of the above could be deductible, just not usually. As a small business owner, I achieved a bucket list item last year. Wanted to take a client out for drinks, but we needed to use my desktop at home to view some edits I'd been working on. Solution? Bought a mini keg at the local beer and wine store on the company card and drank at home. Buy a keg with company money, check. I was doing diligence review on a year's worth of receipts for a government-funded research program. One of the grad students bought a few $100s worth of jewelry, presumably for his wife. While they were on a research trip, he tried to expense it. We did not include that receipt in the package we sent to the government. I used to work for a company where we had to do a fair bit of travel. One of the consultants had been out in the bush, yes Australia, and his hat was blown off and lost. The next expense claim he submitted included hotels, meals, travel and one hat. Our manager rejected this saying that his hat wasn't part of the job and he couldn't claim it. Next expense claim had the usual hotels, meals, travel etc. Plus a note at the end. There's a hat in here. Find it.